They are a sort of psychological riptide that no matter how hard we try to swim, it can really feel hard or impossible to get out of, and sometimes we feel like we're going to drown. And narcissistic partners learn those distorted core beliefs we have quite early and will often weaponize them. They'll say things like, "Come on, you're trying to get that new promotion because you feel like you aren't good enough." I'd like to welcome you to this short series on working on your cores, to help you heal from narcissistic abuse. This is a 5-part series addressing core work, I guess, that you could do, because by understanding these core issues, you will be in a better place to cope with and heal from narcissistic abuse. I'll be taking on 5 core issues to address. We'll be talking about core wounds, core values, core beliefs, core fears, and core hopes. So let's talk about the most difficult of the cores, shall we? I think we'll start with the hardest place of all and go from there. I think the most difficult one of all is core wounds. Core wounds are primal. They are the psychological injuries we incurred early in our lives. You can sort of think of them as broken bones that never healed right. And when pressure is put on them, they hurt. They don't work as well as we'd like them to. Core wounds can be a byproduct of early trauma, abandonment, bullying, neglect, inconsistency, invalidation, gaslighting, or abuse. They are the places in our psyche that still hurt, and that may always hurt. Core wounds can be a whole host of things like feeling not good enough, feeling not ever chosen, feeling helplessness secondary to abuse and trauma, and feeling unsafe in the world. Then there are core wounds secondary to discrimination, or not being seen or heard, or abandonment and rejection-oriented wounds, or not being noticed, or the pain of your scapegoatedness, wounds around being blamed for things that other people did. These core wounds are deep, and they get triggered by experiences in our adult lives. It can be difficult to discern core wounds from core fears, and they do often overlap, and you'll see that when you listen to the core fears video. For example, you may be interviewing for competitive jobs and not having much luck because they're competitive, and you keep getting rejection letters. Now, obviously, that doesn't feel good, but you're sliding into something in this process that looks almost and feels more like depression. All these core wounds are getting activated around not being good enough. The chronic rejection can turn a difficult experience, getting this competitive job, into a full-blown psychological crisis. Even you would be surprised at your own disproportionate nature of your own response. You knew intellectually it was going to be difficult to get a job in this way, but the rejections literally feel like the air being sucked out of your lungs, and you're kind of mad at yourself, like, why am I feeling like this? And that is the lesson to remember about the core wounds. They defy intellect. Our thinking brains may recognize our distortion and our strong reactions, but core wound activation is something we feel physically. I have had people talk about how they feel when their core wounds are hit, and they describe all kinds of reactions, including drowning, panic, air being pulled out of their lungs, their throat constricting, a sense of dizziness. Your body holds those core wounds. And so when they are activated, even though you can talk your way through, you can say things to yourself like, oh, come on, less than 2% of applicants are getting hired. Your body still feels awful. And because your body feels awful, your mind can easily follow. Many people will often trivialize their own core wounds. Oh, I should be past this. Come on. I can't keep living in the past. I can't keep blaming my shit on my stuff from my past. This isn't about using the core wound as a cop-out. We all have them. So the best any of us can do is recognize them. Because if we don't acknowledge them, we actually can be shocked by their power and how destabilizing our responses and reactions can be in certain situations. The core wound is a central issue around why people get into narcissistic relationships and get stuck in them and find it hard to heal afterwards. Not surprisingly, core wounds are a key part of the trauma bond. The core wound is activated through the trauma bond, and it can be a playing out or even an attempt to work it through. My own therapist years ago once told me that I had gotten into a narcissistic relationship to work through my stuff and release it. Well, so much for that. I still have the core wounds. Maybe she was right, though. The core wound is constantly activated by the narcissistic relationship for people who are stuck, and can actually be the very thing that makes the narcissistic relationship so intriguing. It may represent a place to work it through. So we may be like a little kid in a scary movie, right? Like you start taking that path into the forest at night, even when we know there are terrifying things in there. Maybe we think we can scare the core wound out of us. It's like a puzzle you get obsessed with and can't let go of. The narcissistic relationship is a constant pinging and activation of the core wound. And as such, people often regress back to the age they were when the core wounds were experienced while they're in this adult relationship, and really feel powerless in the narcissistic relationship, even though they can actually feel quite effective in other parts of their lives, like work, friendships, and other social groups. And because the core wounds developed during the early years and within the family of origin, it also means that those core wounds get triggered and set off by encounters with family of origin, which is why people, again, may feel like their families of origin are like kryptonite. And when they're around them, they feel very powerless in that space, like when they go back to their hometown, despite feeling very functional and adult-like in other areas of their life, like maybe work. Now, of course, narcissists have core wounds as well, and sometimes even deeper core wounds than ours. Wounds around inadequacy, shame, vulnerability, and insecurity. The narcissistic individual protects that core wound through externalization, through projection, by raging at people who activate them, by falling back onto those narcissistic defenses, again, like projection or denial, entitlement, grandiosity, arrogance, control, perfectionism, to shield the core wounds from activation or manifestation. It's the reason many people feel reflexively drawn to trying to rescue the narcissist. Those core wounds peek out and the temptation is there, but you are more likely to get your head bit off if you try to reach in and soothe the narcissist. If you try to soothe a narcissistic person's core wound, they'll often feel like you are pouring salt on their wound. Pun intended. So what do we do about these core wounds? Step one is to identify them, and that's not always easy. Sometimes therapy is really needed to kind of guide you through this landscape, but they are scary. And so we often deal with our fear of our core wounds by pretending they don't exist or trying not to look at them. Bringing the core wounds into the light, and like with all wounds, core wounds also need air, can make them less scary. And in fact, by bringing them into the light, it can allow us to be more compassionate with ourselves, to be the custodians and caretakers of our core wounds instead of always trying to hide them. When we recognize them, we become aware of why situations may feel more painful to us than they might feel the same situation to someone else, and why we become reactive at certain times, and why we may feel completely exhausted after certain encounters. Again, that may not bother someone else. Recognition of core wounds may also teach us to take a more critical look at why we do things that we know are not good for us, or avoid experiences that could be good for us. We can identify our core wounds in a lot of ways by journaling, or meditating, or therapy, or letting ourselves just sort of mentally wander and explore in our own minds and paying attention to what could explain our less than adaptive behavior in difficult situations, to understand the situations we avoid and the situations to which we react really strongly. Once you identify your core wounds, then it's time to recognize that these aren't weaknesses or things to eliminate, but you learn to coexist with those core wounds. Frankly, I believe core wounds may actually drive our empathy, our sensitive awareness of certain situations. If we could just learn to not view them as bad, but just the stuff that happens to us. It's the stuff that makes us us. And if we can learn to not judge these core wounds, to nurture them, to be kinder to ourselves, to be more mindful of the situations into which we enter, and feel less like we're drawn by these magical magnetic forces the way that people experience in narcissistic relationships, but rather the core wounds actually kind of steer the car in a direction that's often not good for us if we don't identify those wounds. Understand your core wounds, though, and I do truly believe that you will have a clearer path forward in your healing. Core wounds are tough to dig into. And I have to say, as a therapist, it's a lot of the work I do with clients. It's not always easy to do on your own. But honestly, when we really try to do the deep dig, the deep dive on the narcissistic relationship, it is amazing how often core wounds really help us understand the path in, the path stuck, and the challenges of the path out. We also have a worksheet on this, and we've throughout the series there are worksheets on all of these core issues. And for core wounds, we have a worksheet. It's in the video notes, and you just click on that, and that's something you can download and write on. It's meant to be a very personal journey, something you need to share with anyone. If you're a therapist, these worksheets may be something that are useful with your own clients. For those of you watching this saying, I'd love to do some digging out of my core wounds, these might be questions that are prompts for you to consider, journal about, or just reflect on. So we're going to talk now about core values. Okay? We've talked about other topics related to cores, like core wounds. And that work on understanding some of the harder stuff and those revelations about things, like I said, about core wounds, can sometimes be more painful. It means unearthing painful patterns from childhood and from early in life. It also means being honest with yourself about the beliefs you hold for yourself and for the world. So let's talk about something that we may or may not always do the deep dive in with ourselves about. We may not even think about it as often because it doesn't even have as negative a connotation. But let's talk about our core values, not in business or anything, you as a human being. I think many people, if asked to share them, would be able to articulate some of their own core values. Some of you have probably had to do this maybe in some kind of workplace exercise. There are lots of websites out there that just list out lists and lists and lists of core values. You just type the term core values into a search engine and see what comes back at you. But some of the core values that come up most regularly are things like authenticity, beauty, compassion, kindness, success, fairness, community, family, loyalty, faith, responsibility, wealth. If I had to list the hundreds I have seen laid out, it would take forever. Sometimes they're even in like a deck of cards, and you can sort them into piles and do all kinds of other activities to help you organize your core values. Core values are a byproduct of lots of things. What we might have been taught in our families, by our schools, by our culture, by religious communities. And then as life goes on, we shape them in adulthood as we come into sort of our own sense of our values. Core values can also shift over time. Perhaps a high focus on success and wealth you might have had in younger age may shift to family and community later in life. While we tend to have central core values that persist, some core values can shift, again, with time and experience. Our core values are important because they guide how we work, how we relate, and what we expect or hope from the other people in our world. When our core values are disconnected from how we live and work and be in the world, it doesn't feel so good. And again, I'll be including a worksheet as we do throughout this series for you to actually explore your core values. That's available in the video notes. Now, in a narcissistic relationship, it can be very easy to drift away from your core values. Let's start with coming from a narcissistic family of origin. It's quite remarkable how much children can have some pretty attuned sense of their own core values, but then these core values may get distorted or shaped by a controlling family system that really may keep trying to intrude into a child's head that only suckers are nice, or compassion, or success and achievement are everything. Don't waste your time being such a little sweetie. In a family that doesn't see or validate or empathize with a child, the child may not be able to authentically or in a healthy manner develop core values. I have worked with many survivors of narcissistic family systems who will say that their family of origin really gave them a rather distorted sense of values, and it took them a long time in adulthood to almost deprogram from that and find their own path of values. Core values can also be shaped by a narcissistic relationship in adulthood. Whether we are aware of it or not, our core values do impact relational choices. If family, for example, is a core value, then you may gravitate to someone who says they value family. If faith is a core value, then you may choose a partner who shares that value. But the fact is, core values do not always actually clearly decide decision-making about a partner. The struggle is in narcissistic relationships. Your core values will be tested or skewed in those relationships. So many people don't understand these relationships, so they get stuck in trying to please an unpleasable partner. And in so doing, and trying to please that unpleasable partner, may actually start giving up on some of their core values to do so. A person, for example, who values friendship may become isolated and no longer nurture their friendships anymore. A person who has core values around achievement may end up thwarting their own career due to their partner's criticism and limiting comments, and will then believe that they personally, their core value has shifted away from achievement and career, rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm giving up on the things that matter to me. The shape-shifting of the narcissistic relationship means that core values would shift too. And people who are mired in narcissistic relationships may not even want to do core values-oriented work because it will force a reckoning on what they have shifted from a core values perspective just to keep this relationship alive. Part of the healing process after a narcissistic relationship is really to simply get reacquainted with your core values. It can be painful to witness how far you may have drifted away from your original core values, and on top of that, to see how much the voices of your family or other significant narcissistic players in your life may have shaped you. So while it can be reorienting to do this work, it can also be colored by grief, because you may recognize that there was drift in the midst of these toxic and trying relationships. You may be wondering, do narcissists have core values? I think they do. I think we all do. Because a core value isn't necessarily a good thing. Value seems like a good word, right? They may not be nice. And maybe we shouldn't be judging each other's values, right? But for a narcissistic person, their core values may be much more centered around things like wealth or status, power, achievement, success, beauty, youth. I mean, having a superficial core value is still a core value. It may not be in line with yours, but it's theirs. The real struggle comes because narcissistic people are so often not good at being self-reflective, so they're not able to articulate them and may even shape them to what they think the world wants. We can get a glimpse into anyone's core values by really looking at what motivates them and what orients them. For a person whose core values are family, friendship, and relationships, they will put the effort, the time, and the bandwidth, and the heart into that, choosing that over other things. The real mind F word comes when the narcissist complains that their core values are compassion and wellness and integrity. And then they turn around and lie and abuse and manipulate. And it seems quite clear that what orients them is in fact wealth and power and status. But the narcissists aren't dumb. They know that's not always a good look. I actually once chatted with a narcissistic man who copped to it. It was just refreshing. He said point blank, I have 3 core values, and they're money, money, and money. and I'll do whatever, and the value of doing whatever it takes to get it. It wasn't my groove, but I certainly appreciated his clarity and ended the conversation as soon as possible. So when you meet a communal narcissist who's yammering on about their core values around humanitarianism, but at the same time you know they abuse their volunteers or sexually harass employees or engage in shady business practices, that disconnect is what plays with the mind of other people near the narcissist. The narcissistic person's incapacity to articulate and clearly see their core values is a core problem. Now, we have attached a worksheet in the video notes to explore this further for you to think about your core values, where they came from, how they motivate you, and also how have they, if they have, drifted as a result of a narcissistic relationship in adulthood, and the feelings you may have about the drift in your core values that have come about because of these narcissistic relationships. Understanding and staying in touch with our core values are a key element of learning about how these kinds of difficult systems have shaped us. Getting in touch with what matters to us and staying in touch with ourselves so we can make better choices in adult relationships, whether around intimate relationships, workplace relationships, friendships, or even our evolving relationships within our families of origin. And we need to recognize that when we are being pulled astray from our core values, that's about as big a red flag as there can be. So for all of us, we have to catch ourselves and make sure that our core values are shaped to us, not to others. Narcissistic people are very, very vulnerable to goal setting, every setting, to other people, right? Because they need supply. This is why communal narcissism is a thing. They know that they can get validation if they play at being a humanitarian and a rescuer and a saver of the world. So they put all that out there to get their validation, but their behavior doesn't line up with their core values. What any healthy person has is congruity. Congruity between their behavior and their values. When there's a disconnect there, that's really when the problems begin. Hope this gives you some clarity. I hope that worksheet gives you something to work with. And again, for you, it's a private exercise. It doesn't have to be shared. Sometimes it actually is interesting to do it in a group and see how different values can be. And also, for those of you who are therapists, these worksheets may be a useful tool for you to consider working with clients. This core work can help you understand so much about narcissistic abuse. Today, we're going to talk about core beliefs. Now, we all have them. And these core beliefs can be sort of mental shortcuts of a sort, beliefs that are inherent to us and guide our core values. You know, we talked about core values in this series too, so you'll understand all of this together. So let's talk about core beliefs. Core beliefs aren't always healthy, though they can be. Core beliefs tend to be beliefs that are persistent, pervasive, stable, and that we apply them to a whole bunch of different situations in our lives. Core beliefs can be grouped into beliefs about the self, beliefs about the world, beliefs about people. Our core beliefs about ourselves can be things like, I am resilient, I am funny, I am weak, I am smart, I am a failure. Our core beliefs about ourselves may also guide how we navigate the world, the choices we make, and how we interpret what happens to us. For example, someone not getting a new job and saying, I didn't get the job because, once again, I'm incompetent. That's a core belief. Core beliefs about the world may be that the world is a dangerous place, the world is unfair, or the world is good. Again, these beliefs will impact how we navigate the world and what we expect from the world. Our core beliefs about people may be that people are bad, or that people are dangerous, or people can't be trusted, or people are inherently good. Everyone has different ones. It's the same drill. Those beliefs shape what we expect of people. Now, core beliefs are tricky because they can limit us. If we hold negative core beliefs about ourselves, we may not try or may not aspire to anything. Our core beliefs about people, if they're distorted, we may not trust getting into relationships. Because core beliefs, like I said, are so pervasive and stable, they guide how we interpret all kinds of events. If our core beliefs are chronically negative, we're always going to interpret any kind of ambiguous situation as negative or bad or threatening. Now, obviously, on the more positive side, positive core beliefs can be protective. So when bad things happen, our core beliefs may drive a more positive interpretation. And as such, if we have those kinds of more positive core beliefs, we may experience less negative mood states in the wake of any kind of given event, especially if it's ambiguous. Now, core beliefs, like all core issues, start in childhood and often represent a hybrid of the messages that we were given in childhood, the lessons we were taught, the ways that our family or the people around us were interpreting what was happening around us, and messages from society. It can mean, for example, that people from any kind of marginalized group may have developed negative core beliefs based on their early experiences or interactions with the world or experience with things like racism or classism. So when it comes to narcissistic relationships, you can definitely see how core beliefs can put people at risk. Core beliefs are things like, I will never find love, or I will never have a healthy relationship, or I am not lovable. Those kinds of core beliefs can obviously make people really vulnerable to things like love bombing, cognitive dissonance, justification, and getting stuck in the narcissistic relationship cycle. If the patterns in the narcissistic relationship, reinforce these negative core beliefs, it can actually get more difficult to unstick yourself. And if there are also negative core beliefs about people, for example, that all people are untrustworthy, then sticking around may feel easier since it is congruent with the belief that everybody's bad, so why bother trying to find something better? Everybody's bad, so I might as well, stick with this bad thing instead of a new bad thing. Core beliefs can also be very limiting when it comes to workplaces and growth in workplaces. So core beliefs might be things like, I'm not that smart, or I'm an imposter, I'm going to get found out, or I'm not courageous enough, or I'm not good enough. These things can hold people back, especially in workplaces, from making changes, pursuing opportunities, seeing something through. If you originate from a narcissistic family system, these core beliefs are often an internalization of the indoctrination that is being part of a narcissistic family. Things like, who do you think you are? Oh, come on, people like you don't go to Yale. Really, you, a doctor? Stick to something easier, like being a janitor in the hospital. Or nobody's going to ever want you if you look like that. Or things like, nobody wants a woman with such a big career. You're not going to be attractive to anyone. Or no son of mine is going to become an artist. That's not even a job. These cruel jabs, combined with the rest of the gaslighting and invalidation, can then gel into distorted core beliefs that persist for a person's entire life. The real problem with narcissistic relationships is that they literally permanently cement our negative core beliefs. Remember, core beliefs are very difficult to swim away from. They are a sort of psychological riptide that no matter how hard we try to swim, it can really feel hard or impossible to get out of, and sometimes we feel like we're going to drown. And narcissistic partners learn those distorted core beliefs we have quite early and will often weaponize them. They'll say things like, come on, you're trying to get that new promotion because you feel like you aren't good enough. What are you trying to prove to anyone? The narcissistic relationship is in essence a big mirror for all of your negative core beliefs. That mirror of the narcissistic relationship reflects back to you that you aren't good enough. Your goals are too lofty. You never finish what you start. You are too emotional. People will know you're an imposter. Those things get mirrored back every day in a narcissistic relationship, don't they? Now, what if people with positive core beliefs end up getting into a narcissistic relationship? It happens. And, well, at one level, those positive core beliefs do have the potential of being somewhat protective. Perhaps a person with those beliefs, an idea of like, I am a good person, will bristle at the criticism and the discard cycle and get out. But these relationships tend to be so insidious that even people with healthy core beliefs can still get played. The healthy core belief person, the person who has those healthy core beliefs, can believe, hey, I can solve any issue. I am strong. I am effective. I am good. May then turn around and think, well, this person this narcissistic person, they don't think they're narcissistic, I'll just try harder in this relationship. Any problem in a relationship can be solved, and those positive core beliefs can actually result in someone actually exhausting themselves in trying to make a relationship work. Core beliefs are so baked into us that they become a sort of invisible compass that guides us without us really understanding where we're being guided. Personally, I'll own it. One of my core beliefs is that I am not good enough and I am not brave enough. And so I have no right to put myself out there. This played out over and over again in childhood. And even as an adult, I find myself saying, you know, girl, you're nuts if you think you can do this or do that, or put yourself out for this or that. I view myself as a coward too. And another core belief I have is that the world is a very dangerous place. These are my core beliefs, and unfortunately I don't always make the best decisions as a result. Core beliefs are like sculptures made of clay you keep adding to. The core beliefs come from childhood, but adult experiences shape them with new clay. Adult trauma, for example, may leave us believing the world is unsafe, or that people are harmful, or that love is dangerous. So we add and we shape them, and sometimes our core beliefs actually get even stronger, for better or worse, in our adult relationships. Sometimes our core beliefs go off in a different direction. The win, as you can imagine, is if negative core beliefs can get shaped into more positive ones in adulthood. That transition is actually the hardest to achieve, because really at a primal evolutionary level, negative core beliefs are a bit more protective, as they are designed to not only help us perceive threat, but steer us from danger. However, sadly, they can also lead us to remain in danger, because then our beliefs about danger get reinforced. So it really is a bit of a mind you-know-what. So what do? First, you got to figure out what yours are. Well, once again, we've attached a worksheet for that. What are your core beliefs? I want you to envision putting yourself out there for a new opportunity. What would you tell yourself as you take that chance? What do you think? What do you think you deserve in love and relationships? What do you tell yourself about the world and life? What beliefs that you hold came from childhood? Which core beliefs were shaped and revised or even constructed in childhood? How do your core beliefs hold you back, and how may they actually help you aspire? Did core beliefs get you into or keep you in a narcissistic relationship? It's quite important. It's really important to understand the difference between core beliefs and just beliefs. We all have beliefs, right? Beliefs are more superficial. Beliefs are what we call more malleable, more changeable. Core beliefs are bedrock. Sometimes you aren't even fully aware of your own core beliefs, and sometimes they can be quite painful and vulnerable to admit to. Regular beliefs are things like, yeah, I'm a nice person. A core belief may be, I don't deserve to be happy. Those two things, I'm a nice person, I don't deserve to be happy, can coexist in someone, but you can see that that core belief is what gets you stuck. So please do those exercises. They're in the video notes, and reflect on your core beliefs. It's an exercise all of us should be doing every year, because understanding these core beliefs can help us understand how we drift into unhealthy places. I hope that makes sense of it. And as you do this core work, I often think of core work as a place where people, they say strengthen your core and then you'll be sort of stronger and healthier all around from a physical perspective. It's about time you started doing core exercises for your psychological core, because in the long run, while it's very important to have a healthy physical core, I can think of nothing more important than working on and understanding your psychological core, especially when it comes to understanding and protecting yourself in narcissistic relationships. Now, in this series, like I said, there's 5 core issues we're going to be addressing. And today, we're going to be taking on the specific issue of core fears. Now, some of you may be wondering what is the difference between a core belief and a core fear? Perhaps core fears are something that could be subsumed or nested under core beliefs. Because not all beliefs are fears, but I do think all fears at some level are beliefs. Core fears are always limiting and typically go back to early fears. These aren't phobias per se, but core fears may include things like fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of looking foolish, fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of getting sick, fear of being forgotten. By definition, core fears limit us. A person with a core fear of rejection may not take chances, may not try to meet new people or try new jobs. A person with a core fear around abandonment may become very reactive at the time of departure in a relationship. A person with a core fear of failure may not attempt anything other than things that are well within their skill set and their wheelhouse, and only stick to things that are inherently not challenging, which means then they will not be able to grow and really reach their full potential. The core fears, not surprisingly, originate most often from early familial and environmental issues. The child who lost their parent, or a parent left them, or the parents were never available, or the child would be rejected if the child made a need known. That can all drive a fear of abandonment. A child who was raised in a family characterized by shame and criticism, and that child who would only get noticed when they achieved something that the parents would want, and even then might even still get shamed about it. Well, good for you for winning. You got lucky this time. A child in that situation may over time develop a core fear of failure or a core fear of rejection. A child who is raised by a overly somatically or illness-oriented parent who is always disproportionately concerned about health or health-related issues, and it raised real issues in the family system, children like that may have a core fear of getting sick. Not all experiences raise core fear similarly, but you kind of get the idea. Now, as you can imagine, being raised in a narcissistic family system can raise numerous core fears and numerous issues around core fears. These are family systems in which children are unseen, invalidated, where there is at best variable empathy, if any. There's fear, there's walking on eggshells, a constant sense of feeling like you're not enough, lots of conditional love. You only get loved when you deliver good quality narcissistic supply to the parent. So these family systems are literally a factory for core fears. And not surprisingly, the most consistent fallout observed in people who are raised in narcissistic family systems is anxiety, which is obviously a complement to fear. The myriad core fears that arise when a person is raised in a narcissistic family system will obviously manifest as core fears. The difficulty with core fears is that they can be a driver for less than healthy behavior in ourselves. When we have core fears, we tend to shoot lower, or set goals that aren't even right for us, or sell ourselves short in relationships. And as you can imagine, core fears also set us up for a greater likelihood of ending up in a narcissistic relationship as adults. Why? Because we may have that, for example, that core fear of abandonment. So we may just relent and give in and go along so that other person doesn't leave. If we have a core fear of ending up alone or being left alone, then one may be willing to overlook the red flags in a narcissistic relationship, the red banners, the red alarms, just in favor of making the relationship work so the person doesn't leave. Once a person is in the relationship, we may find that their core fears are reinforced consistently by a narcissistic person. The approach and the avoidance nature of the narcissistic relationship, you're in, you're out, it's always you go in, they pull back, that kind of thing. It means that core fears like rejection and abandonment are pretty much reinforced on the daily. In addition, the criticism and invalidation that are such a universal part of these relationships means that the fears of failure also get lots of airtime. In fact, one could argue that a narcissistic relationship of any kind is a daily reinforcement and galvanizing of your core fears. And sadly, some people develop new core fears in their relationships. People who once weren't so affected by fears of abandonment or fears of being able to manage on their own can find these core fears actually set in after the manipulation and control and dominance of a narcissistic relationship, which isn't surprising, right? Now, what about the narcissists? Do they have core fears? They are actually a warehouse of core fears. Now, here's the difference. The difference is for narcissistic people, their core fears are unprocessed and they sit buried deep inside them. Their core fears are like puppet strings that pull them every which way. Their fear of abandonment, their fears of rejection, their fears of inadequacy, their fears of failure. They're endlessly deep. If you were to point out to them that perhaps their core fears are activated, trust you me, you would not want to be in the splash zone of their rage when you tell them that. Their core fears are the driver of their rage and manipulation and domination and invalidation. And anything that triggers those fears will be destroyed. Now, for the rest of us, when our core fears get triggered, we tend to become a bit tentative, anxious, yielding, or even more self-doubting than usual. Right there is a key difference between people with and without antagonistic personality styles. The antagonistic folks, when those core fears get thrummed, they tend to attack. The key to all of this is that you understand your core fears. By understanding them, you can better assess what is happening in a situation and figure out why you may be upside down or confused. Sadly, in the world of trauma bonding, when our core fears get activated, it may actually become more difficult to unstick ourselves from a bad situation. The familiarity of an environment that feels like the original core fear generating environment that can then get created in an adult relationship means that we just get really good at making lots of justifications and the belief that something magical is happening in this relationship. That's why it's so intense. Nah, that intensity is just someone who knows how to strum the tune of your core fears. And trust you me, there is nothing magical about that. We all have core fears. And when we are tentative or we are hold back or we feel stuck, it's often our core fears getting activated. There are situations in our life when we react gracelessly or maybe react more strongly than we wanted to. It's often our core fears being activated. And unlike a phobia or other disproportionate fear of a thing or an event or situation that isn't really dangerous, our core fears are narratives. They're the stories we tell ourselves about the various psychological things that go bump in the night in those childlike parts of us. Now, as with this series, there's a worksheet in the video notes if you want to do some journaling or thinking about your core fears. It could end up being a worthwhile exploration for you to be able to understand your reactions and responses to a whole host of situations, but more specifically within the confines of your narcissistic relationship. Not just relationships you have now, but relationships you've had historically. By understanding your core fears, they become less of this invisible hand that's guiding you and something that you can be aware of and say, yeah, this is getting activated. And now I kind of understand what is getting set off in me. So you can take better care of you and explore this in ways rather than getting stuck in yet another cycle of toxic relationships because those core fears are keeping you stuck. We're taking on core hopes. So I thought this would be a good place to sort of land this series on. Might as well end on a good note when it's such a difficult topic. Something that can actually facilitate healing and help all of us survive this process of healing are core hopes. Bless us as human beings, right? Life cannot break these core hopes out of us. And these aren't just like superficial hopes like I want to go to Hawaii on a vacation or I want to get a new car. These are far deeper and wider hopes. Some of these may be aspirations or humanitarian. That core hope might be that someday we deal with children who are in poverty or suffering. Some of our core hopes may be about other people. A core hope for me personally is actually that my sister would have a wonderful life and be happy. Some core hopes may be for yourself. You may have a core hope for wanting a happy family, a core hope for a healthy child or children. But they are hopes, core hopes that are integral to you and frankly may be tied into your beliefs and even your core wounds and core fears and core values. Now, when our core hopes get dashed, it does not feel good. Same with all the other core stuff. The way our core hopes build, they start early. Our core hopes are driven by what we see in childhood and perhaps maybe what we don't get. Some people's core hopes, for example, like let's say they came from a dysfunctional, chaotic family with lots of arguing and fighting. Perhaps their hope, simply their core hope, was a peaceful family that does stuff together, or a core hope of a safe place to live. Sometimes our core hopes are driven by what people tell us to hope for. You know, that usual checklist type stuff. You're supposed to core hope of a good career, core hope of a certain kind of family. It gets tricky if that's not really what you want. In fact, maybe your true core hope is wanting a life that's very full of adventure and living on the edge and meeting new people. If your core hopes aren't in line with what your family wants for you, it can actually sometimes get a bit messy with manipulation and guilt at plays. And then you start feeling, oh my God, even my core hopes aren't good enough. Now, goodness knows that a narcissistic relationship is a straight up core hope killer. Sometimes you may get part of the story, a house or a marriage or kids. So perhaps it seems like part of the core hope is being realized, but then you recognize that it's only part of a story. The core hopes may have also been about fidelity or compassion or kindness or partnership. You may have gotten the house and the partner and the kid, but not all those other things. A major issue is that our core hopes often don't get fully articulated when we are younger. Sometimes what we think are our own personal core hopes are either our family's hopes for us or society's, or we get caught in wanting this idea of a family without taking the time to focus on other needs like empathy, mutuality, and respect. It's easy for a person to get caught up in the window dressing of the core hope of a family, but not really thinking about what a lifelong partnership looks like. Many people, both during and after a narcissistic relationship, may begin to believe that they had no right to expect so much from a relationship, that they were asking for too much, and that perhaps their core hopes were grandiose. I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's grandiose to expect to not be gaslighted or to expect to be respected or listened to. Or maybe that they simply thought they were asking too much in the relationship. Some people within the confines of the narcissistic relationship may begin to believe that their core hope to have a balance, I don't know, between career and family or to do work that mattered to them was too big of a core hope because they weren't supported in it in their narcissistic relationship. And after it being invalidated repeatedly, they may have simply abandoned the core hope rather than questioning the relationship. Yes, I know you're wondering, do narcissists have core hopes? Of course they do. Now, narcissists' core hopes do tend to be a bit grandiose. They're left over from childhood, just like their core values. Their core hopes tend to be around grandiose hopes of ideal love, fame, success, money. They tend to be fantastical hopes, and the struggle is that most of the time, the narcissistic person's core hopes don't come to fruition, and then the narcissistic person falls into a victimized entitlement and rage that their dreams did not come true and their core hopes were not realized. And this can actually set up lifetime rage cycles with rage at partners, family members, and employees over things just not working out because they often don't in life. Their core hopes not being realized. Narcissistic people, as a rule, are often malcontents, and the malcontentedness is the core hopes not happening as they want. And then when their core hopes don't turn out the way they want, they're not able to regulate, and then it comes out as rage. For some people in a narcissistic relationship, having core hopes can almost feel dangerous. The core hope of having a happy and intact family can keep someone stuck in a narcissistic relationship, hoping, begging, praying that the narcissist will change, hoping that all that future faking actually isn't all fake. That core hope for an intact family can shield a person from seeing their narcissistic relationship accurately and then just staying too long. The core hope of wanting a close relationship with a parent may mean that you keep enduring their ongoing invalidation just so you can maintain that hope. The core hope of working in a certain job or in a certain industry may mean that you keep enduring an abusive boss to stay in it. The tough part is in maintaining the core hope and still setting a boundary and recognizing how it is keeping you stuck. Your core hopes are important. They are the things that may imbue life with meaning and purpose. And we also need to figure out how to regulate or rethink of the core hope if the core hopes don't land as we hope. A core hope, let's say you have a core hope of family and you don't have children. A core hope of going into a certain profession, but that all gets thwarted. And when that happens, to be able to catch yourself so you don't fall into a vat of core wounds. Your core hopes are important, even if they don't land exactly the way you want. Maybe what turns out to be the family you put together isn't what you thought it would be. Maybe you end up going into something related to that profession in a different way. Maybe you don't get to live in a foreign country, but you get to learn the language. I want you, all of you, to commit to keeping those core hopes alive, but never letting them become blinders and getting stuck in a narcissistic situation. Now, as throughout the series, we have a worksheet where you can do some self-reflection. That worksheet is available on the notes section of this video. A lot of us don't ever take that moment to say, what are my core hopes? Like, what did I really want to come up in life and want? I think a lot of them are quite universal, but you never want to assume. And also, any one of the exercises as part of the series is meant to be very private. You don't ever have to feel compelled to share these core hopes with another person. If you are in therapy, it might be something you might want to take into therapy. If you are a therapist, I'm hoping that maybe even these worksheets could be something useful you could work with your clients on or use them as part of the work together. And if you're doing it just for yourself, your core hopes, what you might say, I don't want someone to judge my core hopes. It's terrible to think that someone could, but they're really not judgeable. The core hopes, like a lot of these core things, are the things that make us us. And to keep those core hopes, not as something that you feel like, well, if this doesn't come true, I'll be disappointed, but rather it tells you a little bit about which way your compass is set of the things that matter to you. Again, a really big part to doing the work of meaning and purpose, which are a very big and important part of doing the work of healing from narcissistic abuse. Thanks again, Dick 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 Abuse. Thanks.